Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about this camera, the Olympus Stylus Zoom. We're going to be talking about my initial impressions of the camera as well as some of my experience buying and shooting the camera. Even though these cameras were originally intended for families and casual shooters, they command quite the high asking price these days, and over the past few years have gained themselves a one-way VIP ticket on the hype train. Frankly, they're pretty capable cameras, and I honestly didn't expect that I was going to admit this, but I can really see why the price has gone up, and I really do think that if you get a good deal, this camera can be worth the slight premium that it commands. So first, I have a couple thoughts on point and shoot cameras in general, and then we're gonna get right into what I think about this camera specifically. I honestly struggled to see where point and shoot cameras, especially point and shoot film cameras, fit into my photography kit. And I actually really like using a digital point and shoot camera for that style of work. The Sony RX100III is a really great, small, compact, and capable camera that's perfect for throwing in a bag, and it captures really nice photos of comparable image quality, stuff that's good enough for Instagram or light sharing. Probably nothing that I would print really largely, but definitely serviceable. And it works really well for taking video when I'm out in the field. Honestly, when it comes to point and shoot film cameras, I always found that I would shoot really carelessly. So with the Sony, I never really felt wasteful using it and taking a lot of photos. And that's something I struggled with when it came to point and shoot film cameras. Of the point and shoot film cameras that I've owned in the past, a lot of them had some fatal flaw. Some of them, the image quality just wasn't good enough to be usable, or they were old and loud and misfocused way too often. But when it comes to this camera specifically, I'm actually pretty impressed. For one thing, the design makes portability superb. Even the RX100 Mark III has to be put in some sort of separate carrying case so that you can protect the rear LCD screen or the tiny doors that cover the lens. The sliding door clamshell design means that the camera is protected all the time. That, along with not having any loose buttons like an advance lever that could get caught on something inside your bag, means that you never really have to worry when it's kind of just tossed in a bag or a pocket. That really makes this camera wonderful for taking out when the main focus of your outing isn't taking photos. Shooting with SLR cameras and medium format cameras is an absolute joy, and as much as I would like all of my outings and all of my trips to revolve around shooting film, that's just not the reality of life. And since it's used on days like that, the automatic nature of the camera becomes a huge added strength. I have to constantly remind myself though that that strength can't turn into an issue. With my other point and shoot cameras that I've owned, I would run through rolls of film like they were going out of style and never actually think about the photos that I was taking. I think it took me a little bit of maturing and learning about my own personal photographic style to really appreciate the sort of niche use that this camera presents to me. The official manual provided by Olympus is extremely straightforward and very bare bones, but I read through it trying to look for some hidden nifty feature, and I actually did find one. Turns out this camera has a nifty little spot mode that allows you to spot meter and spot focus, which is really useful if there's something in front of your main subject or if your subject is backlit. You activate it by holding down both the self timer and flash buttons on top of the camera. The lens is pretty solid. It's not the sharpest lens I've ever used, but it certainly gets the job done. I personally think that the camera would have a little bit more utility if the zoom range was extended, especially on the wider end, maybe something like 24 or 28 millimeters. But 35 to 70 is perfectly usable. You also need quite a bit of light to shoot without the flash. At the wide end, the fastest aperture you can use is 4.5, and at the telephoto end, the fastest aperture is 6.9, making the lens overall pretty slow. And speaking of the flash, when you turn the camera on, the flash is set to the automatic mode. So if you want to turn it off, you have to spend a few seconds cycling through the menu so that flash doesn't unintentionally go off. This does slow you down a little bit, but overall, from the time you pull the camera out of your pocket and turn it on, it is ready to shoot fairly quickly. My biggest and only real serious gripe with this camera is the dismal microscopic viewfinder. It's just plain hard to use sometimes, and it takes a lot of getting used to coming from big bright viewfinders on SLR cameras. So honestly, yeah, I admittedly really see the appeal here. I understand why the price is going up. You are paying for a great combination of quality glass, ease of use in a small, really nicely ergonomic package. And I think if you don't overpay for one, you can get your money's worth with a camera like this. A couple weeks ago, I was out shooting with my Zenza Bronica ETRS, and I happened upon a small camera shop called New York Cameras. And I stopped in to see if they had anything interesting. I had a really nice chat with the owner about Minolta cameras and about some of the things that I was on the hunt for, and I noticed this camera on the shelf. It was untested, and it was missing the small plastic back door on the back of the camera. But when he told me the price, my monkey brain took over and I jumped on the deal. It was only $35, which is well below the average asking rate on eBay, so I couldn't say no. And on top of that, having had a pleasant experience at the store, I wanted to give them some support. I also loaded up a roll of Kodak Pro Image 100 that I purchased with the camera and fired away, finished off the roll that day, and this was the result. Light leaks with these cameras are incredibly common. The rubber used to light and weather seal the back and front of the cameras shrinks over time. I had actually purchased another Olympus Stylus zoom point and shoot camera a couple years ago, which had a similar problem. The light leaks were actually coming through the lens barrel on that camera, and thankfully the light leaks were coming through the back on this camera, which is easily fixable with light seal foam and some tape. Frankly, I didn't mind throwing some tape on the camera. It's not really a big deal, and it added a little bit of character. I loaded it up and took it out for a day at the boardwalk for my first dedicated outing shooting the camera. Taylor and I volunteered to do a beach cleanup that morning, and most of the day was going to be spent picking up trash on the beach. So I didn't really want to have any sort of cumbersome camera kit to carry around with me. It was the perfect opportunity to put this camera through its paces. The morning provided some nice light and textured clouds, but as the day went on, the cloud cover got a bit more flat and dull, so definitely not optimal. And after the volunteer work, we met up with our friends Artie and Jeff for a day of shooting. I shot a roll of Color Plus 200, and I think the results are pretty good. Almost all of the shots were in focus, and the camera got the exposure right almost every time, with the exception of a few photos that were underexposed. But it was never so drastic that I couldn't fix it in post later. I haven't done much recording out in the field while I was shooting, so it was definitely really easy to have the Sony RX100 in one pocket and the Olympus Stylus in another pocket, and be able to pull them out at any time to record a quick clip or take a quick shot. Being able to carry the camera in my pocket and not have to think about settings or changing lenses was a really refreshing experience. I enjoyed shooting this camera a lot on that day, so I actually wound up ordering a replacement back door to try and fix the light leak issues. When the door arrived, I swapped them out, and the new door makes a much more satisfying audible click when it closes, and it clearly sits more flush with the camera body itself. I also noticed that the pressure plate on the old door is broken. There's supposed to be two small brackets here, but it looks like the plate was pulled on, which broke the brackets, causing the plate to be misaligned. That very well could have been the cause of some of the light leaks, and it was definitely the cause of the reflections that showed up in the first roll that I shot with the camera. There doesn't seem to be a ton of repair info on these cameras online, probably because people just throw them out if they suspect that they're broken. But if you notice any issues with the pressure plate on your camera, that might be the reason, and it might be worth looking into a new back door. So after I swapped out the doors, I loaded up a roll of Lomo 800 for the next couple days of shooting. With no tape this time, I'm throwing caution to the wind. And actually here on my script, I wrote, "Man, I hope I don't eat my words." And luckily I'm not eating my words. The shots came out just fine. No light leaks. The next few days of shooting consisted of some planned outings alongside having the camera on hand when doing normal errands. And it was great to be able to carry around a film camera so easily. At this rate, between this camera and the Sony RX100 Mark III, I really don't have any excuse to not have a camera on hand at all times. And the combination of portability and film results means I'm probably gonna wind up having this camera on me a lot. So yeah, I hope that was informative if you're thinking about picking up a camera like this. If you're thinking about spending a little bit more and getting one of the non-zoom models, or if you don't really care about that and are looking into maybe a cheaper one. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you next time. So also, if you're interested, I will leave the link to the beach cleanup that we did, the volunteer organization, down in the description. They do 2 cleanups a year. One is in the spring and one is in the fall. And the one we attended overall was a really great experience. It was well organized and everyone was super friendly. Afterwards, I read that there were actually over 5,000 people that volunteered that day. They did a great job making sure safety features were implemented properly, and despite that many people volunteering, it never once felt unsafe. So if you live in New Jersey and you have been to the beaches, you know how poorly that they get treated, and you know how desperately volunteer organizations like this one need the help picking up garbage. So if you have a free Saturday morning, I believe one is in April and one is in October, consider signing up and picking up some trash.